Protect your home and family from home burglary and home invasion with Guardian Security Screens. Custom-made steel screens installed in as little as 4 to 6 weeks, protecting the Wasatch Front area one family at a time. A part of the Security Assessment Group.
Tonight, the scramble to avoid a financial crisis. President Biden tries to assure the country that the banking system is safe. What you can do to protect your money. Here are tonight.
And the KUTV app. This is 2 News Live.
Well, thanks for joining us on 2 News Live. I'm your host, Brian Schnee. It's a little bit of a different kind of show we're bringing you here on 2 News. We're going to dive a little bit deeper into some topics. Hey, let's get the formalities out of the way. It's Monday, March 13th. This is the first time we're doing this, so bear with us. We're going to go in depth tonight on a number of topics. The Silicon Valley Bank collapse, that's what we're going to look at. And of course, weather with another big storm on the horizon and how flooding could come into play. And finally, we are 20 years and 1 day since Elizabeth Smart was found in Sandy after her abduction in Salt Lake City. Before we dive in, here's a look at what's making headlines tonight. A number of these stories you can find on our website right now, KUTV.com. A 56-year-old died at Arches National Park over the weekend. Now, rangers were called to the Devil's Garden area at this point on Sunday, where CPR was already in progress. Looking at our second headline this evening here on 2 News Live in Washington County this morning, a DPS helicopter hoisted a man who was out riding this bike on a trail. This happened last night, got stuck in a slot canyon. They believe he got stuck there after falling nearly 20 feet into the canyon and sustaining some injuries. Moving on to our third headline. We talked about this briefly, concern over the near future with our banks as Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank collapsed over the weekend. This is something we're going in depth on shortly with the impact this could have on you. And now finally, here in our final headline, this made headlines on Thursday into Friday. An avalanche in very rural Summit County. There was a skier who was buried. He has now been identified. The family of 46-year-old Ryan Barr from California said he lived life to the fullest and was taken too soon. As we go in depth tonight, you can always get in touch with us during the show. Use the hashtag 2NewsLive to join the conversation. You can always find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, even now on TikTok. Can you believe it? Send a direct message there to weigh in. Going in depth tonight on a few topics. First, the bank collapse and failure from this past weekend. Silicon Valley Bank collapsed due to a run on deposits that made it unable to cover those outgoing payments. New York-based Signature Bank also failed on Sunday, stemming from cryptocurrency exposure. They too could make a run on some deposits. So what does this mean? Ariel Harrison has been looking into this for us today. She is live tonight, and she will discuss kind of the local impact on how these banks here in Utah, how customers here in Utah are feeling this. Ariel, what did you find out?
Yeah, the big question, goodness, will there be local impacts we see here from this this collapse with the Silicon Valley Bank? Now, again, we are in Cottonwood Heights, where there's that one location for the bank that's based out of California. They have a very specific customer base. That's the tech industry. To that question I initially brought to mind, will this have local impacts? We are being told no, and that's from information coming from state leaders and also local banks, because this bank where we're at, one of the office buildings, I should say, that customer base is in the tech industry. It's so specific, which is why we saw those companies impacted. But again, from our understanding, news over the weekend, the feds will be stepping in to help them find funds that way or take care of them, so to speak.
So Ariel, how did this happen in the first place? This is obviously a very niche sort of situation for people, and it sounds like this bank just had some real high rollers that deposited all at once.
Exactly. So I spoke with the VP of Finance over at Mountain America Credit Union today about this, and he kind of explained it to me in this way as to what led to this. He said after the pandemic, there was a lot of money left in tech, and when interest rates went up rapidly, it became more difficult and more costly and expensive for those businesses to raise money, which is what ultimately led to it costing too much, and then this collapse that we saw happen over the weekend. That's kind of the gist of it, that they explained it to me, and we know what followed.
Ariel Harrison live for us in Cottonwood Heights tonight with some details on these bank failures and closures and how they're, the collapses rather, and how they're impacting Utahns tonight. Ariel, thank you so much. The two bank failures are the second and third largest failures in U.S. history, more than $300 billion in assets. So what does this mean for us? Let's keep diving in on this because we want to know the impact on the average individual, you and me with a bank account. I spoke to two people who have a lot of experience in the banking industry right here in Utah to get those answers. Take a listen. What does this mean for Utahns or just the general individual who has a checking account, a savings account, who has gone to a bank recently, or who uses one of these to do their banking these days? What does it mean for the average consumer?
Well, I think for the average consumer, it means a little bit of apprehension with regard to their knowledge of what is insured by the FDIC and what is not. For the normal consumer, Brian, I don't think that there's a real concern in most cases because unless there is more than $250,000 in an individual account or in a type of designated account, then those insurance or the FDIC insurance is in place for those customers.
The reason we have the FDIC insurance is so that people don't have to, stay up at night worried about these things, and I think it works. So why this happened in California with these folks that seemed to feel like it was necessary to run and pull. I mean, they pulled $40 billion out of the bank in less than a day. That's crazy. It really doesn't affect Utah banks for that matter, except, to the extent there's a whole bunch of companies here in Utah that are looking for new banks. Utah is the 6th largest banking state in the country. We have a ton of options for folks to choose from.
The other points made, the FDIC insures up to $250,000 per depositor per bank. And in the 88-year history of the FDIC, no one has lost a penny of an insured deposit, according to the folks at the State Bank of Southern Utah. Now, we're going to continue the conversation. Earlier today, our Heidi Hatch sat down with Utah Representative Blake Moore to find out what Congress is doing when it comes to regulation. Take a listen.
$250,000. That's a unique number. It's been around for a while. Is that the number? These companies that are having struggle, the companies that reached out to me over the weekend, and there were several of them, a lot of tech companies, and they're saying, look, we're doing everything right. We've got a strong balance. We just had our money at this bank because they're running payroll. You can't run a company, you can't run payroll with less than $250,000 sometimes. So we need to make sure that we have the ability to run operations for our companies. And is that $250 the right number? Who knows? We'll have to dig into that. But Silicon Valley Bank was primarily one sector, and one subset of that sector was tech startups. And that was like all of their business.
Yeah.
Like that's not a diverse, there's concerns there with that being so focused on one micro area that you don't see with other banks where they diversify a little bit better. Yeah. And I think that's a lesson learned from this.
Well, now we want to know how the collapse of the Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank is impacting you. You can scan that QR code that's on your screen right now. You see some mixed results there. In our viewer poll right now, 37% say changing in how they're going to bank in the future. So right now, real-time results, you can add to it by scanning that QR code. And always find more of this coverage on our website, KUTV.com. Also, another big story that would be the weather. California likely to get another atmospheric river this week after the state was drenched with rain and snow. Our sister station there says the huge amount of water that you see in some of these river areas, parks nearby, they are getting impacted by this atmospheric river. So we need to know, what is an atmospheric river?
It's not a new term.
The man to answer the question that has apparently been around for many years, yes. Meteorologist Chase Thomason. What are we looking at here?
You might have heard of the Pineapple Express.
Sure.
It's the same thing. So this is coming from the tropics, and we're going to describe what's been going on. Typically, though, Brian, we're going to show you in 3D. Here we are here in Utah. We get the leftovers. Typically, it hits the Sierras first, but still, we get pounded with lots of rain and snow. So these storms originate out in the Pacific. Typically, we have your classic storm, area of low pressure, hanging out to our west. It grabs that tropical moisture, all that wind originates near Hawaii, and it pulls all that moisture right into California, kind of like a stream or a river of moisture, hence an atmospheric river. with all that moisture coming from the west, the southwest, typically it's relatively mild. So you're seeing some pretty warm temperatures with these storms. Valley rain, mountain snow just wreaking havoc on California, and then eventually all that moisture moves right into Utah.
So it's okay to get leftovers in this situation
right.
after the snowfall we've already had.
California
there's
sees a lot more. Exactly.
Okay.
And typically we see a couple of these atmospheric rivers on average during the winter. This year we've seen almost a dozen hit the state of California. So that's why their snowpack is well above normal. Only with a couple of these atmospheric rivers, 30 to 50% of the snowpack, the moisture that California sees, is because of these atmospheric rivers. So when you have more than a couple, that's why we're seeing a historic snowpack and historic flooding and mudslides with all this mountain snow.
Could have the impact for months to come at this point.
That's right. And we have another one moving in. Here we go in the next 24 hours. So let's get right to your forecast. We already have those winter storm warnings out for the mountains of northern and southern Utah. Significant heavy wet snow will be falling, and there will be some rain falling as well. We mentioned how it originates from the tropics with those winds out of the southwest. Temperatures are going to be increasing. This is going to be one of our milder atmospheric river events that we've had. So with this storm, the peaks of the mountains, it's all snow, but there might be a little bit of rain mixing in. So there could be some issues with some flooding, especially in some of our mountain valleys. So here's all that water just to our west. It's already beginning to spread into California. Notice how we're dry tomorrow morning. That changes though by tomorrow late afternoon and evening. Some scattered showers developing out in western Utah. Again, it's going to be a pretty mild day for tomorrow, and then we'll have numerous showers Tuesday night and into Wednesday morning. Those snow levels are at about 8,000 feet Wednesday morning, so even our mountain valleys will have a little bit of rainfall. And then by the afternoon, we'll still see some rain in the valleys, but notice how it shifts into central and southern Utah by Wednesday night and into Thursday morning as we begin to dry out as we wrap up the work week. Right now, looks like about a ½ inch of water for most of our valleys. Locally, higher amounts definitely possible. And again, snow in the mountains. Cottonwood Canyon's picking up 1 to 2 feet of snow by Wednesday night. Northern mountains 8 to 16. Mountains of central Utah 6 to 12, and down south above 8,000 feet 8 to 16 inches of snow. It will be rain though in St. George, of course. Temperatures in the 60s tomorrow and on Wednesday. Thursday's your coolest day at 59, but by the weekend we're back into the low 60s, and it's dry this weekend down in southern Utah. But these temperatures are still below normal. We have one day above normal though in Salt Lake, and that's tomorrow because of some pretty gusty winds out in western Utah. We'll be close to 60 degrees. A few showers Wednesday, and then by Thursday and Friday we are drying things out, but look at the cooler air that's moving in. We'll see those temperatures in the 40s, and then another storm is possible, Brian, Sunday and into Monday. So they're just kind of lined up every few days, but we have to get first through this storm tomorrow and on Wednesday, and then we'll talk a lot more about that Sunday, Monday storm.
Well, continuing to go in depth on this, flooding a very real concern for some communities just over the last few years. Moab, Enoch, you can think of towns that had to endure homes and businesses flooded, and continuing that coverage tonight.
So we have our Lincoln Graves joins us live from Summit County tonight here on 2 News Live. Lincoln, what have you seen so far today, preparing for our next rain and snow events, it seems like?
Yeah, Chase and Brian, obviously we've seen a lot of snow. If you haven't been up to these mountain valley communities, mountain towns, there is a lot of snow. This is just off the side of the road here in Summit Park. You can see how the snowpack is, how deep it is. One of the things that we were focused on today, though, is we were looking at this lower elevation snowpack, and the National Weather Service saying, this is their term for this, it has started to ripen, so that when rain falls on this kind of a snowpack, that's when we see those flooding concerns. That's what we were really looking into today. We went around Midway, we went around Heber City, we went into Park City as well, looking for any areas where we may see a little bit of flooding. The worry is that as this rain comes in from this next storm system, on that warm side of the system, it could lead to some flooding. We did see a little bit in various places, but again, the real issue is when that rain starts to fall and how mountain communities can actually prepare for it, because it definitely is a concern as they're already starting to see at least a little bit. Back to you.
You know, Lincoln, you talked about the risk for flooding. What I'm kind of concerned and curious about are those mountain communities with all the snow still on their roof. Because if you think about it, all that snow on the roof kind of acts like a sponge, all that snow. And once rain falls, which will likely happen by tomorrow night, it soaks up all that rain and becomes extremely heavy. And of course, we saw over the past couple weeks, at least in some of those mountain communities, those roofs collapsing. Did you see a lot of snow where you're at in the Heber Valley in the Park City area?
Still seeing a lot of snow on roofs. Didn't see any collapses today, but there is one interesting thing. One woman we talked to who lived in Midway, you're going to see her coming up on 2 News at 6. She actually explained that she's very worried about people in her community because she feels like most people in the Midway area haven't been there that long. These are people who have moved in the last 10 or 15 years. And according to her, she's like, they have never seen a winter like this. So her roof is cleared of snow, but she's been warning neighbors, or she's been worried about neighbors who have not taken the snow off of their roofs because of the situation they may encounter. According to her, this is the worst winter she's ever seen in her 45 years here. So that was a big concern of hers, is the snow on the roof. That's why she has had hers taken off already.
All right, Lincoln, thank you so much. A lot of snow behind you there in Summit County. We appreciate you as always. So any final thoughts here, Chase, as we look into the flooding landscape from our next big weather maker coming in?
You know, it really depends on how the rest of the spring goes. Of course, we want that gradual warm up to really prevent any significant flooding issues. We're going to have some localized flooding regardless because it has been a very snowy year. You know, I posted on my Facebook page. You can check it out. We're already above our 1983 snowpack. The difference was, though, back in 1983, and if you remember, that's when State Street had all those floods, is that April and May were cold and wet. So that snowpack continued to climb. Typically, the snowpack peaks in early to mid-April. So we'll be watching that weather very closely.
Find that graphic there. Also, the picture that Chase just posted of us, too. You can find that on his Facebook page, too. All right, let's track the potential for flooding as we continue to make our way through newscasts here on KUTV.com and also 2 News Live. You can find all of these on our website, also on your phone, the weather app as well. We'll continue to go in depth here on these storms as they move into parts of the state. All right, continuing our final topic of the 3 basically that we were going in depth on tonight. Looking back at the 20th anniversary of Elizabeth Smart being rescued from her captors, a new book claims that police pursued the wrong person, almost to the department of Elizabeth herself. Now, Crisis in the Classroom reporter Chris Jones with us tonight. You spoke with Chris Thomas, authored Unexpected.
Yes.
There's been a lot of books written about Elizabeth, the pain that her family has endured, the process of those 9 months. What is different about his book?
Well, you know, we've heard from Elizabeth, we've heard from her uncle, we've heard from many people who've talked about this very issue, but we've never talked to anybody who has been kind of behind the scenes directly. And what Chris Thomas tells us is, look, this is a time in his life. He was newly married. He was kind of thrust into this situation. 29 years old, 80 to 90 cameras at every press briefing. You know, he said that he was at times overwhelmed by this. So we're talking about Elizabeth Smart, who had been missing for 9 months, right? And he said, you know, the thing that was difficult for us was dealing with not only the media, but the police. He said, you know, look, they did everything they could. They worked as hard as they could. But he said over time, they became sort of married to certain theories of the case. One of them being Richard Reese, who was a handyman who worked for the family.
Was that the only claim that they really were making, that they were married to at that point? Was that the only real avenue that didn't seem right to him?
Once they kind of started pursuing that route, Chris Thomas says, you know, they didn't want to pursue any other avenues at all. And he says one of the things that was most concerning to them is after about 6 months, Mary Catherine, who is the sister of Elizabeth Smart and the only witness to the kidnapping aside from Elizabeth, he says, you know, she kind of came forward and said, you know, I think I remember who was there. I think I remember what he looked like, and I think I know his voice. So they went to the police, and the police said, you know what, we've looked into that issue. It's not an issue. Just stop. So they decided that they wanted to maybe pursue it on their own and started pitching the idea to national media. So they show up in New York and LA and start getting ready to tell the story. It gets canceled, right? And one of the producers told them, look, the police are saying that you have concocted this story in an effort to get Elizabeth back into the news. He said that was deeply troubling for the whole family. But he says, you know, if it weren't for the family eventually going out, putting out the sketch, that ended up being spotted by somebody, and then she was found in Sandy, he says she may not be alive today.
Here's some of the interaction between Chris and Chris Thomas, who wrote this book.
Elizabeth may never have been found. Isn't that mind-blowing to you?
It's absolutely mind-blowing. It led to getting Elizabeth back. I mean, if they hadn't done that, it's not out of the question that she's still out there somewhere.
They said, look, you know, we haven't had, some of these people on the police force haven't been there for years, so they didn't really have any comment. But he says that, you know, he thinks that police really have learned a lot across the country about the way that this case was handled here in Salt Lake City.
Lots to take away from that conversation between Chris and Chris, talking about a case you're very familiar with.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much.
You bet.
Even though I'd been kidnapped out of my bedroom, it still was my safe place.
Continuing the conversation with our Mary Nichols. Mary, you sat down with Elizabeth. You've done it a number of times in your career, but what did you take away from your conversation this time around?
Well, I started off by saying, how did she get through all this so gracefully? And she said, it's not been very graceful, you know, and she's just a normal, humble, wonderful person. She's really a sweetheart, and she's hardworking, and she has a passion and a cause, and she's a mom of 3, and she wants the world to be a better place for her kids and for your kids, and she's just a nice grown-up.
So how is she doing now compared to maybe other times you've spoken to her over the last 20 years?
Well, she's about the same. She's very driven and very smart and hardworking and inspiring. It was nice to sit down and talk with her. And I asked her, how do you really feel? I mean, are you harboring anything? And I know that she was told by her mom that if she let Brian David Mitchell take those 9 months that he took away from her life, don't let him take another day. Don't let him take another second by dwelling on it.
How did you feel speaking to her?
I loved hearing her take on it and how she's turning it into something good, you know, and using something that horrible. She doesn't focus on the horrible, but how much does she talk to her kids about it? You know, that kind of thing. That's what I wanted to find out, is how is she dealing with it now as an adult, as a mom. And I mean, we talked about car seats. We talked about what moms talk about. And she's just very inspiring. I'm looking forward to the special.
And the special is tonight at 6:30 on KUTV2 News. You are holding it down and steering the ship on this one. Mary, what can people take away from this? What can people expect?
That's what I asked her. You know, what can people expect from you for the future? And she's inspired by her father, who wants to make the world a better place. Her whole family is inspiring and helped her get through it. And what's next for her? And it's the foundation. It's helping people try to prevent sexual assault and help survivors deal with it.
Tonight at 6:30 on 2 News. Thank you, Mary.
You bet.
Well, after tonight's special, we'll have the full interviews with Elizabeth posted online, KUTV.com, our 2 News YouTube page. You'll hear from her about the past 2 decades, her work and advocacy efforts today, present time, to try and help others. Thanks for watching our debut of 2 News Live. Chase and I will be here 5:30, Monday through. We made it out alive. Yes, we did. We hope you join us again for more in-depth conversations on the topics that impact you and your family. Stay tuned. 2 News at 6 begins in just a few minutes over on the television and on the app and on the website, KUTV.com. Have a good night.